You think farmhouse winter cooking was just basic stews and root vegetables? Think again. From frozen fields and snowbound barns came America's most ingenious cold weather cuisine, dishes born from necessity and perfected through generations of harsh winters. Here are 30 farmhouse winter recipes that kept families alive. Turnip and potato mash combined two root cellar staples into side dish that stretched limited supplies. Turnips and potatoes were boiled together until soft, mashed with butter and milk until creamy, seasoned with salt and pepper. The turnips added slight bitterness that balanced potatoes' blandness with more interesting flavor than either alone. Farmhouse families ate this alongside meat or as main dish when meat was scarce, the combination providing nutrition and satisfaction. In communities where potatoes dominated winter meals, turnips provided variety while remaining economical. Economic necessity created this combination initially, but cooks discovered that limitations often produced better results than abundance, forcing creativity that improved flavor rather than merely economizing on ingredients. Crackling cornbread incorporated crispy pork skin bits throughout, adding richness to otherwise plain bread. Cracklings left from rendering lard were chopped and stirred into cornbread batter before baking with bread with pockets of crispy, fatty pork throughout. The result was more substantial than plain cornbread, the pork fat making it tender while cracklings added texture. Farmhouse families ate this with beans, greens, or soups, the bread rich enough to serve as meals protein. In southern farmhouses, crackling cornbread represented thrift and flavor, using byproducts that enhanced rather than detracted. The cracklings distributed created pockets of flavor that made each bite slightly different, turning simple cornbread into something exciting that kept children asking for more portions. Beef heart braised with vegetables turned organ meat into tender winter dinner, economical and nourishing. The heart was cleaned, trimmed, and stuffed with bread and herb dressing, then braised for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes. The long cooking made the dense muscle tender, while stuffing absorbed meat juices and vegetable flavors. Farmhouse families served this at Sunday dinners, the large heart feeding 8 or more people from meat that cost little. In communities that practiced nose-to-tail eating, beef heart represented normal food rather than poverty meal. Nose-to-tail eating wasn't philosophical choice, but practical necessity. Yet the resulting dishes proved that skillful cooking honored animals by using everything they provided to sustain human families through winter. Mock apple pie made from crackers fooled nobody but tasted good. Depression-era innovation that created fruit pie flavor from Ritz crackers and lemon juice. The crackers were broken into pie crust, covered with syrup made from sugar, water, cream of tartar, and lemon, then baked until bubbling. The result did taste surprisingly like apple pie, the crackers softening into something fruit-like while spices provided familiar flavor. Farmhouse families made this during winter when preserved apples ran out but craving for pie remained. The recipe represented American ingenuity and the willingness to create pleasure from whatever was available. Depression-era necessity became family story told with mixture of pride and humor, as how hardship created ingenuity that sometimes succeeded in creating pleasure from pantry basics when nothing else remained. Frozen custard pie was once a winter marvel turned icy temperatures into culinary advantage, baked in unheated back porches where nature provided perfect refrigeration. Farmhouse wives mixed eggs, cream, sugar, and vanilla into custard filling, poured it into pie shells, and set them outside on December mornings where temperatures between 20 and 32 degrees created texture no icebox could match. The custard froze and evenly, developing ice crystals so fine the result was creamy over icy, smooth rather than grainy. Families served these pies at Christmas dinners and New Year celebrations, cutting thick slices that melted on the tongue. The pies stayed frozen for weeks on screened porches, protected from animals but exposed to cold that preserved them naturally. Children watched eagerly as mothers checked the pies, pressing gently to test firmness. In rural Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota, the 1800s and early 1900s, frozen custard pie represented winter abundance as cold weather could create luxury. The tradition faded as electric freezers arrived, but those who tasted these natural frozen desserts never forgot their delicate texture and pure flavor. Those who remember speak of textures impossible to recreate, winter's gift transformed into silk. Snow cream was winter's first dessert, made the moment fresh snow fell clean and white across farmhouse yards and fields. Children rushed outside with bowls and spoons, scooping pristine snow before it could be touched or walked upon. Mothers added cream, sugar, and vanilla, stirring quickly before the snow could melt completely. The result was something between ice cream and sorbet, light and fluffy with crystals dissolved instantly. Some families added maple syrup or honey instead of white sugar with variations that tasted like frozen forests. Others stirred in cocoa powder or berry preserves saved from summer. The dessert had to be eaten immediately, served in bowls at kitchen tables while wind howled outside. In Appalachian communities and northern farmsteads, snow cream meant celebration, turning brutal weather into joy. Families gathered around tables, laughing as they ate before the treat melted back to liquid. The tradition taught children that winter's harshness could provide pleasure. Modern health warnings about pollution have ended this practice, but for generations, snow cream was winter magic served cold. Children remember the excitement, the race to gather fresh powder before anyone walked through pristine whiteness covering farmhouse yards. Salt pork and cabbage stew filled farmhouse kettles January and February, when fresh meat was scarce and gardens lay buried. Thick slabs of salt pork, preserved in barrels since autumn butchering, were cut into chunks and rendered slowly until fat ran clear and meat turned golden. Cabbage heads stored in root cellars joined the pot, cut into wedges softened for hours. Potatoes, onions, and sometimes turnips added substance, while the pork fat created richness that coated everything. The stew simmered on wood stoves from morning until supper time, filling houses with savory steam. Families ate it with cornbread or biscuits, sopping up the salty broth that provided essential calories for outdoor winter work. In farmhouses across the Midwest and Northeast, this stew represented survival cuisine, stretching preserved meat to feed large families through the coldest months. The salt pork's intense flavor meant a little went far as it economical as well as nourishing. Children grew up associating this stew with deep snow and howling winds, comfort food that warmed from the inside. The tradition faded as refrigeration made fresh meat available year-round. Grandmothers who made this knew precisely how much salt pork created richness without overwhelming cabbage's natural sweetness throughout long simmering. Suet pudding was dense winter fuel, steamed for hours in cloth bags hung over kettles on wood stoves. Beef suet, the hard fat surrounding kidneys, was chopped fine and mixed with flour, dried fruit, molasses, and spices. The mixture was packed into floured cloths, tied tight, and suspended in boiling water until firm. After 3 or 4 hours, the pudding emerged solid and heavy, sliced thick and served hot with cream or hard sauce made from butter and sugar. The suet provided concentrated calories essential for surviving winter, each slice delivering lasting energy. In British immigrant communities' America's farmlands, suet pudding connected families to ancestral traditions while adapting to available ingredients. Women competed over whose pudding was lightest despite its density, whose spices were most balanced. The dessert appeared at Christmas dinners and winter celebrations, its richness marking special occasions. Children anticipated these puddings for weeks, knowing the dried fruits inside were rare treats during lean months. The tradition required patience and skill, careful timing, and temperature control. Christmas preparations began with suet pudding days early, the house filling with spice-scented steam that promised celebration abundance. Head cheese wasn't cheese at all, but jellied meat from hog heads, made during winter butchering when cold weather preserved everything. After autumn hog killing, heads were boiled for hours until meat fell from bone and liquid turned gelatinous from natural collagen. The meat was chopped, seasoned with vinegar, pepper, and herbs, then poured into pans where winter cold set it firm. The result was sliceable loaves with meat suspended in clear jelly, eaten cold with bread and mustard. In German and Eastern European farmhouse communities, head cheese represented thrift. using parts would otherwise be wasted. Families stored the loaves in unheated pantries where they stayed fresh for weeks. The texture was unique, tender meat in firm jelly that melted slightly at room temperature. Some cooks added pickles or onions to the mixture with variations that reflected family preference. Head cheese appeared at winter breakfasts and lunches, providing protein when other meat was being rationed for future meals. The tradition taught that nothing from the hog should be discarded, that skill could transform scraps into delicacy. Skilled butchers took pride in their head cheese, knowing proper seasoning and perfect gel distinguished excellent cooks from merely competent ones' communities. Dried corn soup used summer's abundance to feed winter months, made from corn kernels dried on strings hung from rafters. Women cut kernels from fresh ears at peak ripeness, strung them like beads, and hung them to dry until they rattled like stones. In winter, handfuls of these kernels were soaked overnight, then simmered with ham hocks, potatoes, and milk until tender. The corn rehydrated into something richer than fresh, concentrated and almost sweet, thickening the soup naturally. Farm families ate this by the bowlful, often as a complete meal with cornbread on the side. In Pennsylvania, Dutch communities in the Northeast, dried corn soup represented wisdom and foresight. August's plenty transformed into February's sustenance. The preparation required planning months in advance, space in kitchens for hanging corn, and knowledge passed between generations. Children helped string kernels, learning preservation techniques that would sustain them later. The soup tasted distinctly different from fresh corn dishes, earthier and more complex. The soup's preparation was seasonal ritual, marking transition from fresh summer eating to preserved winter stores that sustained families through months of cold. Parsnip fritters turned humble root vegetables into crispy winter treats, satisfied cravings for something beyond boiled or mashed. Parsnips stored in root cellars were grated raw, mixed with egg and flour, seasoned with salt and pepper, and fried in lard until golden brown. The exterior crisped while the interior stayed tender, the parsnip's natural sweetness caramelizing slightly. These fritters appeared at winter breakfasts and suppers, served alongside meat or eggs. In farmhouses where potatoes dominated winter meals, parsnips provided welcome variety, their sweeter flavor making them almost dessert-like. Children who refused plain boiled parsnips would eat these eagerly, the crispy coating making vegetables appealing. The frying fat added richness and calories essential for maintaining body heat during outdoor work. Mothers made large batches, feeding families of 8 or more from a single grating session. The tradition showed how preparation method could transform perception as nutritious food delicious. Parsnip fritters were economical, using vegetables that grew easily and stored well. Modern grocery stores offer convenience but lost connection to seasons, to foresight, to the satisfaction of eating food prepared months before through family effort. Scrapple stretched winter pork supplies by combining meat scraps with cornmeal into breakfast loaves fed families for weeks. After hog butchering, every scrap of meat, organ, and trimming went into huge kettles with water and seasonings, boiling until everything fell apart. The liquid was strained, meat chopped fine, and returned to broth with cornmeal that thickened the mixture into mush. This was poured into loaf pans, cooled until firm, then sliced and fried until crispy. Each slice delivered concentrated pork flavor, the cornmeal adding substance that made little meat go far. In Pennsylvania, farmhouses and German communities, scrapple was winter breakfast tradition, served with eggs and fried apples. The preparation took entire days but produced enough loaves to last through the coldest months. Families stored scrapple in cold pantries where it stayed fresh without refrigeration. Children grew up with its distinctive taste, learning that nothing should be wasted when resources were limited. Each family's scrapple recipe was slightly different, with neighborhood pride and friendly competition over whose loaves had best flavor texture for frying. Sauerkraut with pork and dumplings combined fermented cabbage with winter meat in one-pot meals that sustained farmhouse families through blizzards. Sauerkraut made in autumn from garden cabbages was pulled from crocks, rinsed and simmered with pork ribs or shoulder until meat turned tender. Dumplings made from flour, eggs, and milk were dropped into the bubbling liquid, puffing up as they cooked. The result was tangy, rich, and deeply satisfying, the sauerkraut's acid cutting through pork fat while dumplings absorbed all the flavors. Families ate this in large portions, refilling bowls until the pot was empty. In German and Polish farmhouse communities, this dish represented cultural memory and practical nutrition, fermented vegetables providing vitamins when fresh produce was unavailable. The preparation required advanced work as sauerkraut in fall for winter use. Women took pride in their kraut's flavor, the perfect balance between salt and tang. The overnight fermentation of sauerkraut created beneficial bacteria that aided digestion and provided vitamins, making this dish delicious and healthy winter food. Apple butter made in copper kettles became winter's sweetness, cooked outdoors over wood fires that burned through October nights. Bushels of apples were peeled, cored, and cooked with cider and spices until they turned dark brown and thick enough to hold a spoon upright. The cooking took 12 to 20 hours, requiring constant stirring to prevent burning. Families gathered around kettles, taking turns with long wooden paddles, talking and singing while apples transformed. The finished butter was sealed in jars and stored in cold pantries, providing spread for biscuits and bread winter. In Appalachian and Pennsylvania farmhouses, apple butter meant community effort and shared reward, neighbors helping with stirring in exchange for jars. The smell of cooking apples and cinnamon announced the process from miles away. Children remembered these gatherings for life, the firelight and laughter making hard work feel like celebration. Communities gathered for apple butter making, sharing labor and stories with bonds as strong as the butter itself through long nights of stirring and watching fires. Rabbit pot pie used winter-caught rabbits in deep dish pies that fed entire families from limited meat. Rabbits trapped in snowy fields were cleaned, jointed, and simmered until tender, the meat pulled from bones and mixed with potatoes, onions, and carrots. This filling went into deep pie dishes, covered with pastry crust, and baked until golden. The crust absorbed rich gravy while staying flaky on top with texture contrast that made every bite interesting. Farm families served these pies as Sunday dinners, stretching 1 or 2 rabbits to feed 8 or more people. In rural communities, the Northeast and Midwest, rabbit pot pie represented resourceful cooking, turning small game into substantial meals. The pastry added calories that vegetables and lean rabbit meat couldn't provide alone. Women competed over whose crust was lightest, whose gravy most flavorful. Children anticipated these pies eagerly, knowing rabbit meant a special meal. Women who mastered rabbit pot pie could feed families from little, stretching 1 rabbit into 8 servings through clever use of vegetables and perfect pastry. Mincemeat made with venison preserved autumn hunting success through winter months, cooked with dried fruits, spices, and brandy into filling so rich a little went far. Fresh venison was ground or chopped fine, mixed with suet, raisins, currants, apples, citrus peel, molasses, and warming spices, then packed into crocks where winter cold preserved it. Spoonfuls of this mixture filled pie crusts the season, baked until bubbling and served warm. The combination of meat and fruit seems strange today but was traditional, providing complete nutrition in concentrated form. Farmhouse families stored crocks of mincemeat in unheated pantries, knowing they had dessert available anytime. In areas where deer hunting was successful, mincemeat meant converting fresh meat into shelf-stable food that would feed the family for months. The preparation required significant work but produced something genuinely delicious, complex flavors that developed over time. The complex spicing made mincemeat unique to each family, recipes closely guarded and passed only to daughters who proved worthy of carrying culinary tradition forward properly. Corn pone fried in bacon grease turned cornmeal into crispy cakes that accompanied every winter meal. Coarse cornmeal was mixed with boiling water and salt, formed into thick patties, and fried in rendered bacon fat until the outside turned crackling crisp. The interior stayed soft and dense, the bacon fat providing richness that plain cornmeal lacked. These pones appeared at breakfast with eggs, at dinner alongside beans or greens, and at supper with whatever meat was available. In Southern and Appalachian farmhouses, corn pone was daily bread, cheaper than wheat flour and equally filling. Children ate them hot from the skillet, burning their fingers and not caring. The preparation was quick enough to do fresh for each meal, requiring only 3 ingredients families always had. Mothers fried dozens at a time, feeding large families economically. The tradition connected people to their cornmeal-based heritage, African and Native American foodways adapted to American farmhouse life. 3 ingredients and skilled hands created food that sustained millions, as excellence required technique over expense, wisdom rather than wealth in farmhouse kitchens. Blood sausage used every part of butchered hogs, mixing blood with fat and grain into sausages that sustained families through lean months. Fresh blood collected during butchering was stirred immediately to prevent clotting, mixed with chopped pork fat, cooked grain, onions, and spices, then stuffed into casings. The sausages were cooked gently, cooled, and stored in cold pantries where they stayed fresh for weeks. Sliced and fried, they became breakfast meat or sandwich filling, the blood giving them dark color and distinctive rich flavor. In German, Polish, and French farmhouse communities, blood sausage represented cultural tradition and practical thrift, using ingredients that might otherwise be wasted. The preparation required skill and timing, work done immediately after butchering before blood could spoil. Families who made excellent blood sausage took pride in their craft, sharing their best with neighbors. Children learned that these sausages were normal food, not strange, part of the rhythm of farmhouse life. European immigrants brought this tradition, adapting old-world recipes to American ingredients and American cold with fusion cuisine generations before that term existed in culinary vocabulary. Buckwheat cakes made from home-ground flour were winter breakfast staple, served with butter and sorghum molasses for sweetness. Buckwheat grew well in poor soil and short seasons as a reliable crop in northern farmlands. The grain was ground in home mills or taken to local millers, producing flour with distinctive earthy, almost nutty flavor. Mixed with buttermilk and eggs, the batter made thick pancakes that farmers ate stacked high before outdoor work. The cakes were hearty and filling, providing energy that lasted through morning chores. In farmhouses, New England and the upper Midwest, buckwheat cakes meant winter tradition, served every morning from November through March. The sorghum molasses added necessary calories, its strong sweetness complementing buckwheat's bold taste. Children drowned their cakes in molasses with sticky messes their mothers tolerated, because the food was nourishing. The tradition faded as white flour became cheaper, and buckwheat less commonly grown. The buckwheat's distinctive taste was either loved intensely or rejected completely, creating strong opinions that lasted lifetimes and defined childhood breakfast memories forever in farmhouse families. Chicken and dumplings from old laying hens turned tough birds into tender winter suppers that fed families abundantly. When hens stopped laying in winter, they became dinner, boiled for hours until meat fell from bones. The rich broth was seasoned with vegetables and herbs, then dumplings were dropped in, simple dough that puffed up as it cooked, absorbing chicken flavor throughout. The finished dish was pure comfort: tender chicken, fluffy dumplings, and rich gravy ladled into deep bowls. Farm families ate this on Sunday evenings, gathered around tables after afternoon church. In rural communities nationwide, chicken and dumplings represented making use of what you had: old hens transformed through patience and technique. The long cooking required minimal attention, pots simmering while families did other work. Women's reputations rested partly on their dumpling texture, light but substantial. Children scraped bowls clean, sopping up every drop of gravy. Sunday dinner of chicken and dumplings meant the week had rhythm, that Sabbath brought rest and special food that honored tradition and gratitude for sustenance provided. Salsify oyster stew used garden roots that looked like dirty white carrots but tasted surprisingly like oysters. This odd vegetable, grown in kitchen gardens and harvested after first frost, was peeled, sliced, and simmered in milk with butter, onions, and seasonings until tender. The result tasted remarkably like oyster stew, providing coastal flavor to landlocked farmhouses. Families who couldn't afford or access real oysters made this dish for special occasions, serving it at Christmas dinners and New Year celebrations. In farmhouses, the Midwest and Great Plains, Salsify stew represented culinary cleverness with luxury from backyard gardens. The vegetables stored well in root cellars, staying fresh through winter. Children were often tricked into eating it, told they were having oyster stew and believing it because the taste was so convincing. The tradition showed how flavor could be achieved through unexpected means. The resemblance fooled guests who thought they tasted real oysters, creating delight when trick was revealed, and proving farmhouse gardens held surprising treasures for those who knew. Hominy was transformed winter corn, soaked in lye water until kernels swelled to twice their size and turned soft and tender. Whole dried corn was covered with water mixed with hardwood ashes with caustic solution that loosened tough hulls. After days of soaking and multiple rinses, the corn emerged pure white and dramatically changed, ready to be cooked as porridge or fried crispy. Farmhouse families ate hominy as breakfast cereal with butter and salt, as dinner side dish, or fried until golden as crispy cakes. In southern farmhouses with Native American and African influences, hominy represented traditional foodways preserved through generations. The preparation took time and attention, dangerous lye requiring careful handling. Women who made excellent hominy took pride in the results, perfectly white and tender. Native American techniques preserved through generations showed knowledge transfer across cultures, different peoples sharing food wisdom that helped everyone survive harsh continental winters together. Pork and beans baked in crocks became Saturday night tradition farmhouse America. Dried beans and salt pork transformed through long, slow cooking. Navy beans soaked overnight were layered with chunks of salt pork, onions, molasses, and mustard in earthenware crocks, covered and baked in low ovens for 8 hours or more. The beans absorbed pork fat and molasses, turning creamy inside while developing caramelized crust on top. Families ate these with brown bread, coleslaw, and pickles. The traditional Saturday supper before Sunday's cooking was forbidden. In New England farmhouses, baked beans represented Puritan tradition adapted to American ingredients. African, Native American, and European foodways merged. The preparation required planning, soaking beans Friday night, and starting cooking Saturday morning. Children loved the sweet, savory flavor, scraping stuck bits from crock edges. Saturday nights meant baked beans inevitably, the smell announcing weekend's arrival, promising rest and simple, abundant food after weeks' hard labor on New England farmhouses everywhere. Fried salt cod turned preserved fish into winter breakfast or supper, soaked to remove salt, then cooked crispy in pork fat. Salt cod imported from Atlantic fisheries was soaked for 24 hours, water changed multiple times, until fish turned mild and tender. Shredded into pieces, it was fried with onions and potatoes with hash that was economical and filling. In farmhouses far from oceans, salt cod provided rare seafood, connection to coastal communities. The fish was shelf-stable, requiring no refrigeration as it practical for rural storage. Families ate this with biscuits or cornbread, the salty fish complemented by neutral starch. Children developed taste for it early, associating its distinctive flavor with home. The tradition showed how preservation technology allowed foods to travel far from their sources. The soaking and frying represented transformation, preserved fish becoming fresh meal through technique and patience that turned hardship into opportunity for satisfying suppers in inland homes. Persimmon pudding used wild fruit that ripened after hard frost, when freezing temperatures sweetened bitter fruit into delicacy. Wild persimmons were gathered from trees on farmhouse property, the fruit pressed through sieves to make smooth pulp. This pulp was mixed with flour, eggs, milk, spices, and molasses, poured into pans, and baked into dense, dark pudding. The result tasted like concentrated autumn, sweet and complex with hints of caramel. Farmhouse families served this at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Wild fruit transformed into celebration dessert. In southern and midwestern communities where persimmon trees grew, this pudding represented seasonal bounty, free food that required only labor to gather. The fruit had to be perfectly ripe, rock soft after frost, or the pudding would be astringent. Regional pride attached to persimmon pudding, each area claiming their recipe was authentic, their technique correct, their pudding the real version that honored tradition and completely. Cottage cheese made from winter milk used dairy surplus when butter making left excess skim milk. The milk was warmed until it curdled naturally or with added rennet with curds that were cut, drained, and rinsed. The resulting cheese was fresh, mild, and versatile, eaten plain, mixed with cream, or used in cooking. Farmhouse families made cottage cheese weekly during winter when cows produced less milk but gave enough for cheese making. The cheese appeared at every meal, breakfast with fruit, lunch and sandwiches, dinner as side dish. In dairy farm communities, cottage cheese represented efficient use of all milk products, nothing wasted. The preparation required timing and temperature control, skill that farmhouse women developed through practice. Children ate it mixed with sugar or jam, creamy tanginess balanced by sweetness. Fresh cottage cheese tasted nothing like store versions, the immediate tang and variable texture reflecting individual cows, season, and maker's skill in ways industrial production never could replicate. Johnny cakes from Rhode Island tradition traveled west with migrants, cornmeal griddle cakes that were breakfast staple in farmhouse kitchens. White cornmeal was mixed with boiling water, salt, and sometimes milk with thick batter that cooked on hot griddles greased with pork fat. The cakes developed crispy edges centers, served hot with butter and molasses or maple syrup. These cakes cooked quickly enough for fresh breakfast every morning, requiring minimal ingredients families always kept. In farmhouses America, Johnny cakes connected people to colonial foodways, Native American corn preparation adapted by European settlers. The name itself sparked debate, some claiming it was journey cake for travelers, others insisting on Shawnee cake. Children loved these cakes, eating them folded around butter that melted into the hot cornmeal. Morning ritual of Johnny cakes connected generations, children learning by watching mothers and grandmothers cook, absorbing technique through observation rather than written recipes or formal instruction. Oyster plant patties used another name for salsify, this time fried into cakes that really did taste like fried oysters. The roots were boiled until tender, mashed smooth, mixed with egg and breadcrumbs, formed into patties, and fried crispy. The resemblance to fried oysters was remarkable in taste and texture, providing coastal flavor to inland families. Farmhouse cooks served these at special dinners, impressing guests with what appeared to be expensive seafood. In communities far from oceans, oyster plant patties represented culinary magic, garden vegetables transformed through technique into luxury. The patties required fresh roots harvested after frost for best flavor. The botanical knowledge required distinguishes modern cooks from farmhouse ancestors who knew dozens of plants by Latin and common names, understood their uses, and grew them for specific purposes. Smoked sausage made during winter butchering preserved pork through smoking that added flavor while preventing spoilage. Ground pork was mixed with spices, stuffed into casings, and hung in smokehouses where hardwood fires burned for days. The smoke penetrated the meat with distinctive taste and forming protective coating. These sausages hung in cold storage winter, sliced as needed for meals. Farmhouse families ate smoked sausage fried for breakfast, simmered with sauerkraut for dinner, or sliced cold for sandwiches. The preparation required knowledge of meat handling, spice ratios, and smoking techniques passed through generations. Different woods created different flavors. Hickory most common, but apple and cherry prized. Pride in homemade sausage was justified, the smoking process requiring attention and skill that distinguished true farmers from those who merely kept animals without understanding full use of resources. Boiled dinner, New England style, was not meant to impress. It was meant to fill the table and the bellies. A hunk of salt pork or corned beef went into a pot with water and started boiling early in the day. After a few hours, in went the cabbage, potatoes, carrots, turnips, and whatever other root vegetables you had sitting in the bin. No seasoning beyond salt and maybe a bay leaf. No garnish. But the result? A broth so rich it clung to your spoon and vegetables so soft they could be cut with a fork handle. This was the food of New England farmhouses. It was born out of necessity, out of cold winters, tight budgets, and the need to feed a big family with what little you had. Served right from the pot, often in chipped bowls, it might not have looked like much. But it was hearty, reliable, and warm in a way that no microwave dinner ever could be. Now it is forgotten outside of a few family tables in Vermont or Maine. Too plain for restaurants, too slow for most kitchens. But if you ever taste it again, you will remember why it mattered. Salt pork beans were something that we actually got over from New England and was a big part of Midwestern farm cooking. It's something you could say is really tied to both colonial influence on American eating practices and habits and also farmhouse culture, which was largely shaped by how economical a recipe could be. Salt pork would be cured instead of being smoked, and it was one of the most common forms of meat you would ever find in regions with lots of farm homes. It was a time before refrigeration had become such a nationally accessible and available phenomena, so people had to make do with other means of storage and preservation. This dish was started with dried beans, which had to be soaked overnight, and a piece of salt pork would be added to the pot. Then, molasses or brown sugar would be thrown in, and you had stark differences between the New England way of doing this, where a lot of Europeans were actually living, and the Southern style of doing this. See, in New England, people would oversweeten it with molasses and slow bake it in these earthenware pots, and that's a lot more similar to a version of this dish known as Boston baked beans. In the South, it was actually made over stovetops with more peppers and less sweets, and in the Midwest, molasses may not even have been a part of the picture because most people were actually using maple syrup. Ground beef and potato hash was the week's final meal. Everything left over fried together until golden and good. Cold potatoes were diced, onions chopped, and ground beef stirred in, sizzling in bacon grease until the edges crisped. The sound alone could make a kitchen feel alive again. It was working people's food, simple and sustaining. The kind of meal that made no apologies for being plain because it did not have to. Served hot from cast iron, it was eaten with ketchup, pickles, or whatever condiment the cupboard still had. In some homes, an egg might crown the top, a small luxury that made it feel like something more. Families called it hash, but it was really a story of thrift, of making beauty from what remained. Every bite carried the smoky taste of labor and care, the warmth of food cooked slow and shared fast. Red pepper winter cabbage fry was the kind of dish that came from gardens long gone quiet under frost, but still managed to show up on the table through planning and memory. Families saved dried red peppers from the warmer months, stringing them up in kitchens where they hung like little sparks waiting for their season to return. When winter settled in and vegetables became scarce, cabbage stayed dependable, sturdy, and patient in the root cellar. Grandma sliced it into shreds, heated bacon grease or whatever fat was left, and tossed it with crushed dried pepper until the pan hissed and filled the kitchen with warmth. The red pepper did not just add heat. It added life, a reminder of summer sun even when the wind howled outside. This dish was quick, cheap, and filling, which made it perfect for families trying to stretch the days between grocery trips. You could feed a whole table with one head of cabbage and a handful of peppers, and no one complained because the flavor was loud enough to make you forget how simple the ingredients were. This was winter survival dressed up as comfort, built on the knowledge that nothing should go to waste, and everything could become a meal if you treated it right. And when the plate hit the table, steaming and bright with specks of red, it tasted like determination warmed in a skillet. Homemade head cheese is this really traditional farmhouse cold cut that's actually got a bit of a disgusting or at least uncomfortable story behind it. See, typically, this is made from the pig's head, except the head is boiled and the head meat is set in this really gelatin-rich broth, so yeah, unless you're a massive stickler for all things pig-flavored, this genuinely may be too intense for you. It wasn't for a lot of German and French people though, but hey, different strokes for different folks. Not everyone could appreciate the extra gamey flavor of the homemade head cheese, and funnily enough, despite having cheese in the name, the dish actually had no cheese at all whatsoever. I'm not really sure why they ever even called it that to begin with, honestly, but what can you do? What I'm not sure about either is why butchering an entire hog was a family tradition in Pennsylvania Dutch and Midwestern kitchens. I mean, who thinks about father-son bonding time and decides to go out and split a hog's skull in two? creamed chipped beef on cornbread was not just breakfast. It was supper when meat was tight and the pantry was thin. Thin strips of dried, jarred beef were soaked to cut the salt, then fried in a skillet with a bit of butter or lard. Flour was whisked in to make a roux, followed by milk until a thick, creamy gravy formed. That salty beef gravy was poured over thick slices of baked cornbread, dense, golden, and hot from the pan. It was salty, creamy, and rich, with the cornbread soaking up every last drop. This was stick-to-your-ribs food, common in Southern and Appalachian kitchens. Kids grew up on it. Veterans knew it from military kitchens. Everyone had a name for it, some more polite than others. But in farmhouse kitchens, it was practical and beloved, cheap to make, filling to eat, and easy to pull together from long-lasting staples. Today, creamed chipped beef lives on in diner menus, but rarely over cornbread. That version, the one from cast-iron pans and cloth aprons, is slipping away. But for those who remember it, that salty bite still feels like home. Cabbage and sausage stew was winter's answer to hunger. In homes where meat was precious, a single sausage could flavor an entire pot. Cabbage, onion, and potato took up the rest, slow-cooked until they soaked in every drop of smoky richness. The broth was peppery, the smell both humble and hearty. Served in thick bowls with bread, it was the kind of meal that made the world seem softer for a little while. This dish crossed cultures, found in Polish, German, and African American kitchens alike, each with its own rhythm and seasoning. It was proof that good food did not need abundance, only attention. The stew tasted better the next day, its flavors deepening as the cabbage gave up its sweetness. It was the kind of meal that asked for nothing but gave everything: warmth, comfort, and the quiet assurance that spring would come again. Molasses snow biscuits were the winter morning treat families depended on when cold wind rattled the windows and sugar was too expensive to use freely. Molasses poured slow like winter honey, thick and dark, stretching sweet flavor through dough that otherwise would have tasted plain. Grandma mixed flour, baking powder, lard, and just enough molasses to tint the dough the color of early morning shadows. She shaped them quickly, hands practiced, and placed them close together so they rose against one another like a small family huddled for warmth. When they baked, the kitchen filled with the deep scent of molasses that made the whole house feel less cold. These biscuits were soft inside, with a slight crust outside, the perfect thing to tear open and eat with butter if you had it or plain if you did not. They were born from practicality but tasted like comfort, proof that even the simplest ingredients could become something worth remembering. On winter mornings when the world outside felt frozen, these biscuits made the first hour of the day feel hopeful. They were not fancy, but they were dependable, and that meant everything. Molasses snow biscuits were the kind of food that stayed in families even when circumstances changed, whispered from one kitchen to another, because no cookbook ever bothered to capture their worth. Stewed tomatoes and bread was the kind of dish that only makes sense if you have lived through scarcity. Ripe tomatoes from the garden were peeled and simmered down with a little onion, sugar, and butter. Into that bubbling pot went chunks of stale bread, soaking up the juices and turning soft and rich like dumplings. Sometimes you added salt and pepper. Sometimes you just let the tomatoes speak for themselves. This dish was not flashy. It was not the star of the table, but it was honest. It used what was on hand and turned waste into warmth. People ate it as a side, a main, or even for breakfast. It was especially common in summer when the gardens were overrun and the bread box was more crust than loaf. Over time, stewed tomatoes and bread disappeared from memory, written off as depression food, too humble for modern kitchens. But back then, it filled bellies, quieted hunger, and reminded families that simple food could still mean something. Sometimes all you needed was what you already had. Buttermilk soup was a really simple and nourishing dish that many households relied on, especially Scandinavian, German, and Pennsylvanian Dutch communities. Buttermilk was something that arguably the entirety of America, suburban, urban, or rural, was dependent on, But this soup was something you would only find in farmhouses. Buttermilk essentially is just a byproduct of people making butter at home, which you'd actually be a little surprised at how common that was. This soup was a really easy way to get rid of that, though, since it required so much of it. Buttermilk was something you had to be really gentle with when you were preparing it. The heat had to be just the right pressure. It had to be thickened with flour, but too much of it would ruin it. It needed a pinch of cornstarch, not a dash, nor a dollop, and not a generous heap. It needed a very specific pinch. So it was all these tiny details you had to get an intuitive feel for before you could start making these off the top of your head every day. But once you did, it was worth it. Mock chop suey was America's humble imitation of faraway flavors. In small-town kitchens, especially across the Midwest, families used ground beef, cabbage, celery, and onions to create something exotic without straying from local ingredients. Soy sauce, or more often a few dashes of Worcestershire and salt, gave it the illusion of Eastern spice. Everything simmered in a thick gravy and was often served over rice or noodles. For many, it was their first taste of a world beyond their own, adapted to fit Depression-era budgets. It looked different, smelled foreign, and tasted comforting all at once. Kids loved it for its savoriness, adults for how it stretched meat across several meals. Though it began as imitation, mock chop suey became its own tradition, a dish that proved you did not need authenticity to find connection, just creativity and a good skillet. Salt pork winter greens pot was a tradition carried from one cold season to the next, built on the belief that even tiny scraps could transform a whole meal. When money was tight and fresh produce was limited, greens like collards or mustard became the backbone of winter cooking. A small piece of salt pork, barely enough to be considered meat, held enough flavor to season an entire pot. Grandma washed the greens, stripped the stems, and let them simmer until they softened into something hearty and wholesome. The salt pork gave a smoky depth that tasted far richer than its size suggested, and the pot liquor at the bottom became the best part, sipped like soup or soaked up with cornbread. Families relied on this dish not just for nourishment, but for the feeling it gave, a sense that warmth and comfort could come from the humblest ingredients. In winters, when the wind was sharp and bills piled high, this greens pot held families steady. It tasted like strength simmered slow. Tomato gravy over biscuits sounds strange until you taste it. Then it becomes unforgettable. Born in southern kitchens, this was a way to stretch bacon drippings and canned tomatoes into something comforting and hot. After frying bacon or sausage, cooks would use the leftover grease as the base. They would whisk in flour to make a roux, then add chopped or crushed tomatoes and simmer it down to a thick, savory gravy. Sometimes a pinch of sugar, sometimes red pepper flakes. Poured over fresh buttermilk biscuits, it was tangy, rich, and full of body. This was not Sunday food. This was weekday food. Quick, cheap, and made with whatever was in the pantry. Kids grew up eating it for breakfast. Farmhands came in from the field and poured it over fried potatoes. But somehow, this dish slipped away. Maybe because people forgot how to make biscuits. Maybe because tomato gravy never made it into the cookbooks with the pretty pictures. But once upon a time, it was standard fare. Rabbit stew is a dish that I'm sure you've not only just heard of, but probably even had a few times. It was such a common stew to make in the frontier and in farm kitchens, especially throughout the South, but particularly in the Midwest. This was because most of America's rabbits ended up being there, and besides being perfect stew material, those rabbits were also an excellent source of protein for hunters, trappers, and local poachers, villagers, who were making their day-to-day bread living off of the land. During the Great Depression, thanks to a lot of wartime rationing, rabbit started to become a cheap protein that was a nice alternative to chicken or beef, and this meant that people started experimenting. Now, a lot of recipes were cooked with chicken and beef being substituted for rabbit, but nothing quite stuck to the wall as well as rabbit did. Dressed rabbit was joined and browned in bacon drippings or lard before it could be thrown into the stew, and vegetables like onions, carrots, potatoes, and celery were added so that you'd get a more filling meal. The stew was then simmered with different kinds of robots, herbs, and sometimes wine if you really wanted to feel like you were eating rich. Cabbage and bean soup was the workingman's dinner, a pot full of nourishment that cost next to nothing. Cabbage gave it sweetness, beans provided the protein, and a handful of spices made it taste like more than it was. Some used white beans. Others used pintos or lentils, whatever they had in their pantry. Everything simmered together until the beans were tender and the cabbage silky soft. The result was thick and hearty, perfect for dipping bread or biscuits. It was food that did not apologize for being simple because it had no reason to. It filled stomachs, warmed hands, and left no one hungry. It carried the faint sweetness of cabbage and the quiet depth of beans cooked slow. For many families, this was the meal that saw them through the hardest winters, proof that comfort did not have to be costly. A pot of cabbage and beans simmering on the stove was a sign that warmth still existed even when money did not. Sometimes a ham bone or spoonful of drippings was added to give it body. But even without, it tasted like care. It was humble food that made people feel seen, nourished, and safe, a reminder that generosity can live inside a single pot. Hot grits with bacon drippings were the winter breakfast that kept families warm long before the sun climbed up over the rooftops. Grits were cheap, filling, and dependable, which made them perfect for cold seasons when the body needed something hearty to face the day. Grandma saved every spoonful of drippings from the skillet, pouring them into a jar she kept near the stove like it was treasure. When the water boiled and the grits began to thicken, she added a little scoop of those drippings, stirring slowly until the pot turned creamy and rich. The smell alone was enough to pull children from warm beds. This breakfast did not need anything fancy. The flavor came from the memory of yesterday's meal and the promise of today's strength. It tasted like warmth you could hold in your hands, the kind that spread through your chest and made winter mornings feel possible. This was not restaurant food. This was real food made by people who understood how to stretch flavor across days. Hot grits with bacon drippings tasted like comfort, resourcefulness, and the quiet determination to start the day with something good. Liver and onions with gravy was once a badge of practicality. It was the meal that showed you could stretch $1 without sacrificing nourishment. Liver was cheap, it was packed with iron and vitamins, and when meat was scarce or the budget tight, it was the cut that kept you going. Sliced thin and pan-fried in bacon grease or lard, it was then topped with slow-cooked onions and a rich brown gravy that made the whole kitchen smell like dinner time. Farm kids grew up eating it, like it or not. There was no picking around it. You cleaned your plate because tomorrow's supper was not promised. Served with mashed potatoes or thick slices of white bread, it filled your belly and reminded you how strong flavors could be. The bitterness of liver, the sweetness of onions, the depth of that skillet gravy. It was never anyone's favorite dish, but it was respected. It was part of the rhythm of farmhouse life. And now, it has practically disappeared. But there was a time when this dish put strength in your arms and heat in your belly. Gooseberry fool was something that was considered a colonial-era dessert with a lot of roots in English and German cooking. It was something that was first brought over to America by the very first wave of settlers. See, a thing about gooseberries is that they seem to love the cold, so they really did well in the Appalachian foothills and the generally cooler New England climate. They were one of the first available fruits because they would pop up ready to eat towards late spring and early summer. And in times where sugar was a luxury, especially the colonial area, tart fruits like these gooseberries were honestly a lifesaver. Fresh gooseberries were the most commonly eaten ones, but stewing them with sugar made a jam-like consistency that was really wonderful. Folding it into whipped cream or a custard-esque mixture with some brandy would net you a gooseberry fool, and it was an elegant dessert that was really popular because of how little it used and how much it got in return. Ground beef and cabbage gravy over bread was the meal you made when there was almost nothing left, and somehow it still tasted like kindness. Ground beef browned with onions and cabbage made a quick, rich gravy thickened with flour and broth. It was spooned over day-old bread or toast, soaking in until it became soft and savory. The first bite warmed the chest. The second reminded you that a meal could still feel generous even when it was not. Families called it poor man's stew, but there was dignity in its making. The cabbage stretched the meat, the bread caught every drop of flavor, and together they became something greater than the sum of their parts. It was not about indulgence. It was about care and making sure everyone got their share. Fried hoecake dumplings were born from the scraps of dough left behind after making bread or cornbread. Nothing was wasted in winter. Grandma pinched off the excess dough and dropped it straight into boiling broth where it puffed and softened. The dumplings soaked up flavor while staying tender inside, becoming small pockets of warmth in every bowl. They stretched a pot of stew into a full meal, turning a few ingredients into enough for everyone at the table. These dumplings were simple, but they carried the ingenuity families needed to make winter feel less harsh. They tasted like resourcefulness, comfort, and home. Johnny Marzetti casserole was born in Ohio, but spread like wildfire across the Midwest, and for good reason. It was a dish designed to feed a crowd without breaking the bank. Ground beef browned in a skillet, mixed with elbow macaroni, tomato sauce, onions, and a handful of cheese. Then it was all baked until bubbly and golden, with crispy edges and a gooey middle that clung to your spoon. This was not fine dining. This was Tuesday night after chores, with everybody tired and hungry. Some families added mushrooms or green peppers, others left it plain. What mattered was it was cheap, hearty, and tasted just as good the next day. Named after a restaurant owner's brother, Johnny Marzetti took on a life of its own in homes, church kitchens, and potlucks. You would see it on the table in brown glass baking dishes, served with store-bought rolls or buttered corn. But now, like so many casseroles, it has quietly vanished. Maybe too simple, maybe too retro. But for those who grew up with it, that smell from the oven meant comfort, care, and a full plate. Oatmeal meatloaf was essentially one of the most popular farm kitchen recipes during the early 20th century, particularly in the Appalachian region where oats were not only widely available but deeply beloved. Now I know you're going to stop and think how you can ever concoct a meatloaf out of oatmeal and why you would even feel the unholy impulse to do so. Basically, this dish was something that people made when they really had nothing else to eat, and trust me, they weren't making it with excitement. You'll get the impulse, but you're right. It was a hard bite to swallow. The combination of ground beef and pork with rolled oats instead of traditional breadcrumbs was just a sensory and textural no-no for a lot of people, and while the milk and broth helped to soften the days whilst keeping the meatloaf moisturized, it would really not help that much. The Worcestershire sauce added flavor for some, but for a lot of people this was just a mess that wasn't really redeemable. Its only one benefit being that it was stupidly good at keeping you full. It was the kind of thing you would see in community suppers and church potlucks during the early 20th century as a way to stretch a little bit of meat into something that can actually go around a big group of people. Cabbage and tomato skillet was what you made when there was nothing left to make. Ground beef, shredded cabbage, canned tomatoes, and onion, fried together until the house smelled like survival. It was not elegant, but it was honest. Every spoonful delivered the bite of pepper and the sweetness of cooked-down cabbage, proof that even a few cheap ingredients could become a family's dinner. This was the food of mill towns, tenant farms, and one-room apartments where every penny mattered. It cooked fast, served plenty, and left almost nothing to clean up. A working mother's blessing. The color alone was cheerful, red and green against the gray of winter. And though no one wrote down the recipe, everyone remembered it. The cabbage and tomato skillet was not about perfection, it was about endurance, the kind that fed both hunger and hope. Brown sugar sweet potato mash cakes were the winter lifesaver that turned leftovers into a second meal without anyone complaining. When sweet potatoes lingered after holiday dinners, Grandma did not throw them out. She mashed them with brown sugar, a splash of milk, and a sprinkle of spice before shaping the mixture into small patties. They hit the skillet with a soft sizzle, the edges crisping while the centers stayed smooth and warm. These cakes tasted like the echo of a holiday meal, familiar and soothing, as if the season itself refused to let go. Families loved them because they stretched what little they had and transformed scraps into something that felt intentional. Kids did not know they were eating leftovers. They only knew it tasted sweet, warm, and perfect with breakfast or supper. And in winters, when the budget needed to stretch farther than anyone liked to admit, meals like this were a quiet blessing. Brown sugar sweet potato mash cakes carried the memory of abundance into the hard months, reminding families that flavor did not disappear just because the holidays ended. They held on to comfort the same way people held on to each other through long, cold weeks. Which farmhouse winter recipe would you bring back to your kitchen? Drop your answer in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep uncovering America's forgotten food heritage together. These recipes deserve to be remembered.